Oh, John Kerry's Mideast peace talks have gone nowhere. Hey, y'all, Scott Horton here for the Council for the National Interest at councilforthenationalinterest.org. U.S. military and financial support for Israel's permanent occupations of the West Bank and Gaza Strip is immoral, and it threatens national security by helping generate terrorist attacks against our country. And face it, it's bad for Israel, too. Without our unlimited support, they would have much more incentive to reach a lasting peace with their neighbors. It's past time for us to make our government stop making matters worse. Help support CNI at councilforthenationalinterest.org. All right. Welcome back, guys. I'm Scott. It's my show. Scott Horton Show. All right, our spotlight today on antiwar.com is a great read. I really like this. That's why I chose it for the spotlight. The Ambitions Driving the Ukraine Consensus by our friend Scott McConnell at the American Conservative magazine. Welcome back to the show. Scott, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, thanks. Happy to be back.
Good, good. Very happy to have you here. And really like this article. Kind of one of those facepalm shaking my head sort of things here, as I am afraid I agree with you about so much of this. But I guess we need to start off with the news here, which is that they have reached a ceasefire agreement, another one in Minsk. The Germans, the French, the Russians, the Ukrainians, I believe, quadrilateral, is that what they call them, talks there?
Yeah.
And it's set to kick in on Sunday. And then the other news, opposite of that, is the U.S. is sending Army trainers to help get the Ukrainian military prepared for battle. What do you think?
I missed the trainers news. I had seen that there was a ceasefire, and I thought that was pretty good news because it would slow down the kind of march in Washington to get involved in something that has really no good outcomes for America and only bad ones. And I thought my sense is that Obama is probably the only person of any power inside the Beltway who doesn't really want to, who realizes it's a bad idea to get involved in Ukraine against Russia, but everybody in the whole in the Congress and the foreign affairs bureaucracy, or to say 80 or 90% of them think, yeah, boy, we've got to go show this bad guy Putin. And the Europeans are trying to kind of slow this down. I mean, it's more in their neighborhood. And I don't know how well a ceasefire would work, but it would at least lead to the beginning of a diplomatic solution, which would hopefully cool down Ukraine as a big hotspot. But if we're sending trainers, that's not good.
Yeah. Well, trainers aside for the moment, do you think if Obama, either personally or by way of an actual trusted proxy, counseled the Kiev government that, hey, we want you to actually abide by the ceasefire this time and really make a deal here and not just have a on-again, off-again battle for, war in the East for another year, does he even have that much influence over them at this point? Or?
Well, I think if they got a very clear message from America that, it would have to be a brutal message, but the message would have to be, look, America doesn't care that much about you, and America is not going to risk its broad, relationship, which is correct and cordial, with Russia over Ukraine. And that's, because I honestly don't know who was responsible for the breakdown of the final ceasefires, and Ukraine is in, big parts of the population are full of mutual hatred and a civil war thing. But if the most anti-Russian Ukrainians believe that they have America on their side, they're not going to compromise, or they're going to be more resistant to compromising. And so, they really need the message that it'd be hard to say. It'd be hard to put it. It would be a diplomatic way to put it that, no, you're just not that important to us.
Yeah. Well, now, so what's interesting there is what you said about, you sound actually quite amazed, and I know you've been paying attention to politics in the nation's capital for a long, long time here, with a very smart view of how these things go, but you kind of sound a little beside yourself at the consensus here about what must be done in the face of all reason.
Yeah, no, it's true. I am a little bit surprised because I had rather thought that after the experience of the George W. Bush presidency, that Democrats and some Republicans would be a little bit chastened about the utility of military force and American intervention. And also, I often think that a lot of what drives American hawkishness and interventionism is in the Middle East is Israel, and people who care a lot about Israel and take political cues from what the Israeli government wants in one way or another. But that doesn't seem to be the case in this instance. As far as I can tell, Israel is, has pretty good relations with Russia. Didn't even vote for the various UN condemnations of Russia. I think abstained. And the Israeli Foreign Minister Avigdor Lieberman, who's a Russian, was pretty well received in Moscow recently. So it's not that, and I'm trying to figure out what it is. Why is it that you can get an almost unanimous consensus? I would say 90% of the House and Senate, I'm not sure what votes there have been, in favor of getting involved militarily in, starting an escalation in which there's really no obvious exit ramps and there's no obvious American interest at stake, and in which if you play it out down the road and try to figure out what's going to happen, it's only bad things can happen from it. And it's a mystery to me. So I tried to figure it out.
Yeah. To me, obviously the consequences are, well, I don't know exactly how you compare, but considering the H-bombs, you got to figure the consequences could be so much more severe. But it seems about the same level of stupidity as getting into the Iraq War, only I would say with much tighter consensus. They had to really beat everybody over the head with Iraq for a year and a half to get us into that thing.
Yeah.
But it seems like there's a very tight consensus here. James Corden had a piece where he pointed to the few very notable exceptions on the level that anybody listens to, like Mearsheimer or Walt or Kissinger Associates coming out with a few small dissents, one dissent at Brookings. But as you say in your article, on the Sunday morning news shows, on all of them, every guest, everybody knows that there's just no question Russia started this, we got to finish it somehow.
Yeah. No, and the patronizing way in which John Kerry, I tend to have a sort of hopeful view about John Kerry. I think he's a smart man and everything. But he insists on talking about Putin as if Putin is like a child who just doesn't see, the enlightened ways of the West. But we're going to give him an off-ramp, and if he would just take that off-ramp. And it's so, on the part of America, it's patronizing and ignorant. I'm a little bit hopeful that there could be a breakthrough in the Beltway. There's some. I talked to a friend last night who's a friend of a congressman, Dana Rohrabacher, who's a pretty right-wing veteran Republican congressman from California, and he thinks this policy is disastrous. He has a very nuanced and mixed view of Russia. And I have the feeling that if he starts speaking out, there'll be kind of novelty interest. A right-wing Republican who is, not Pat Buchanan, who's anti-war, and he'll get some attention, and then it'll maybe start the things from moving a little bit.
Place your bets, everybody. Dana Rohrabacher to the rescue. No, but you're right, though. He has a real thing about he's basically afraid of China and wants to ally outright with Russia against them. So whatever, as long as he wants to tell the truth about this in a loud way, as you're referring to, that's good enough for me for now.
Yeah, I don't know the whole thing of his worldview, and there are probably things I distrust about it. But the policy we're pursuing, can only force Putin or his possible successors to think that they have to ally themselves and get closer to China, which, I don't think that's particularly in American interest. I think it's at all. And I don't know what they're thinking. So.
Yeah. Well, that's a good place to pick this conversation up on the other side of this break. It's Scott McConnell from the American Conservative magazine. This article is the spotlight today on antiwar.com. The ambitions driving the Ukraine consensus. We'll be right back. Hey, I'll Scott Horton here for the Future of Freedom, the monthly journal of the Future Freedom Foundation at fff.org/subscribe. Since 1989, FFF has been pushing an uncompromising moral and economic case for peace, individual liberty, and free markets. Sign up now for the Future Freedom, featuring founder and president Jacob Hornberger, as well as Sheldon Richmond, James Bovard, Anthony Gregory, Wendy McElroy, and many more. It's just $25 a year for the print edition, $15 per year to read it online. That's fff.org/subscribe. And tell them Scott sent you. All right, guys. Welcome back to the show. I'm Scott Horton. It's my show, The Scott Horton Show. ScottHorton.org for all the archives, etc., etc. Talking with Scott McConnell from the American Conservative magazine. The piece is The Ambitions Driving the Ukraine Consensus. As wrong-headed as it is. Now, Scott, where we were interrupted by the break there, the question was about pushing Russia into a closer alliance, or whatever you call it, a closer relationship with China, healing that old Sino-Soviet split. And I wonder, now that the Cold War is over, what difference does that make necessarily?
American relations with China are still quite correct, but there's almost no international theory by which there isn't going to be greater competition in the next 1 or 2 or 3 decades, and probably military competition. And our actions may be fueling that, and I'm sure the Chinese have no desire to have American bases or influence anywhere near them. So it seems to me that it's more likely that competition can be managed peacefully if it's a kind of triangular relationship, and China has a Russia on its borders that it has to think about, rather than a joint Russian-Chinese anti-American alliance. Though I don't think that's the main reason to worry about the collapse of decent relations with Russia. I think that there's a lot of benefits to having good relations. Among them are nuclear proliferation. There is a lot of nuclear materials. I don't know, actually loose nuclear weapons and stuff, but in the former Soviet sphere. And if Russians become convinced, including like Russian generals and administrators, that the United States is determined to destroy them and break up Russia, and I don't want to underestimate the possibilities of Russian paranoia, and I think that some of that paranoia may be somewhat justified. They could find ways to make life much uglier for the West. So anyway, I think our stakes in having relatively even keel relationships with Russia far outweigh those of provoking them, which we're doing.
All right, now, Robert Perry at Consortium News has this theory that I wonder if you think that maybe this is a little bit of an answer to your question of what's driving, other than obviously the personal ambition and all that, which we can talk about all that stuff in a minute because that's important too.
Yeah.
But Perry's theory is that what really set the neocons off was Russian cooperation with Obama on solving the Syria crisis before we went to war with Assad in the summer of 2013. And that they said anything that can be done to drive a wedge between Obama and Putin must be done now. And here's a button we can push, hire the Nazis in Ukraine to cause a crisis. What do you think of that?
I think there's something to it, and I don't know how much. I don't want to... yes.
Well, it's a speculative kind of question. Yeah. I'm sorry to put you on the spot. It's not science.
The neocons do think strategically, and and they don't have. They don't have obvious other relations to get involved with this, and there are a lot of, I think natural neocon or there's a lot of Jewish history caught up in disliking Ukraine and disliking Ukraine more than Russia. And so the theory that Perry and you just stated, would have to override that to some degree, and it has overridden it. So I don't know. I mean, but I would say that there's probably something to that, and I would be reluctant to say how much, because you need a much more close reading of the sources.
Mm-hmm. Well, what if I broaden the same question, but sort of a broader base for it, with overall NATO expansion over the last decade and a half or so? John Mearsheimer's piece in Foreign Affairs, which I interviewed him about, and he explained it. He really, and it sounds kind of credible in a way. He says, well, basically these wrong-headed people thought that this is just how you spread peace and prosperity in the world, and really not much worse than that. Maybe some Lockheed interests here, helped with the propaganda or whatever, but that basically NATO expansion is an academic exercise in practice, and it hasn't really worked out that well. I wonder how that meshes with what you say about some long-term vendettas against Russia and wanting a regime change there, et cetera.
Yeah, no, I think that for a lot driving this is just natural institutional desire to grow. I think that's probably true about NATO. I don't, in my universe, NATO bureaucrats are not necessarily evil, aggressive, war-minded people. I mean, they think about war, but they're not. And I think there was probably a lot of, they believed in democratic capitalism. They saw new opportunities in Eastern Europe of people who wanted, freedom and democracy and all that, supposedly, and, in some sense, genuinely. And they saw, bigger budgets, and they saw, a reason for NATO to continue. I mean, a way to, because otherwise, NATO could without expanding, NATO might be seen as irrelevant and die. And, nobody who's invested their career in that would want that.
Mm-hmm. All right, now on the current peace talks, I'm sorry to ask you to predict the future or whatever, but are you placing bets on the success of Merkel and Holland here? I mean, it seems like they really mean it, right?
Yeah. Well, what I haven't seen is how much they're willing to broaden the discussion. I mean, there's a lot of talk about the boundary lines and how far you're going to withdraw with artillery pieces, but they're military disengagement talks, exchange of prisoners. I'm sure that there's discussion about what is going to be the broader position of Ukraine between Russia and the West. I mean, that's the underlying subject of the talks. But that aspect is really not written about, and I don't have sources, and so far as I know, nobody does. But there has to be an example, which I think Mearsheimer pointed out, and other people have too, is there was a neutralization of Austria in 1955, a treaty which did much to calm down the Cold War. And Austria, led a fine life as a neutral country until the Soviet bloc, terminated essentially. But it was not, part of NATO, as I'm sure Austrians would have, would have been happy to join West Germany and NATO, but they weren't allowed to. Right. And there has to be some kind of talk about that as the broader status of Ukraine between East and West. And I don't know to the extent that's happening, and to the extent in which Ukrainian leadership has to be told that this is going to be best for you, and you're not going to be able to join NATO, and you're not going to be able to join the European Union without restrictions. And I don't know if that message is being conveyed.
Mm. Well, on the other hand, though, you really kind of make the parameters of a real peace pretty apparent there. It all seems like it could be very easy if everybody was really trying. That we'll have at least the outside powers will all agree that they want this kind of neutrality and to end the conflict, and then to, work with their sides, so-called inside Ukraine, to put a rest to and this is mostly what they're fighting for is which side the regime is going to tilt toward, the Russian side or the EU American one, and so. I
mean, it's difficult for the United States to step down because we've had this Assistant Secretary of State for all of Obama's administration, Victoria Nuland, who's been telling the Ukrainians, your destiny is to join the West and to get to have the European future you deserve. I mean, that's the quote she used, and she means an anti-Russian future, and she means part of NATO. And the United States has spent, as she pointed out, billions of dollars funding various groups in Ukraine to bring about that happen. And then she chose the current Ukrainian foreign minister. And I don't know, Obama has to put a stop to that, and I don't really know if he's politically strong to or cares enough, or if Kerry does. I mean, it's ridiculous that a person like this is, essentially leading American foreign policy in this area, but she is.
Yeah, they got rid of Hagel, but kept Newland.
Yeah.
All right. Well, listen, I kept you overtime, but thanks very much for your time, Scott. Good talk to you.
Thanks very much, Scott.
All right, so that's the great Scott McConnell. He's at the American Conservative magazine. It's the spotlight today on antiwar.com. The ambitions driving the Ukraine consensus. We'll be right back. You hate government? One of them libertarian types? Or maybe you just can't stand the president, gun grabbers, or warmongers. Me too. That's why I invented LibertyStickers.com. Well, Rick owns it now, and I didn't make up all of them, but still, if you're driving around and want to tell everyone else how wrong their politics are, there's only one place to go. LibertyStickers.com has got your bumper covered. Left, right, libertarian, empire, police, state, founders quote, central banking. Yes, bumper stickers about central banking. Lots of them. And, well, everything that matters. LibertyStickers.com. Everyone else's stickers suck. Hey, y'all, Scott Horton here for WallStreetWindow.com. Mike Swanson knows his stuff. He made a killing running his own hedge fund and always gets out of the stock market before the government-generated bubbles pop, which is, by the way, what he's doing right now, selling all his stocks and betting on gold and commodities. Sign up at WallStreetWindow.com and get real-time updates from Mike on all his market moves. It's hard to know how to protect your savings and earn a good return in an economy like this. Mike Swanson can help. Follow along on paper and see for yourself. WallStreetWindow.com. Hey, Scott Horton here to tell you about this great new book by Michael Swanson, The War State. In The War State, Swanson examines how Presidents Truman, Eisenhower, and Kennedy both expanded and fought to limit the rise of the new national security state after World War II. If this nation is ever to live up to its creed of liberty and prosperity for everyone, we are going to have to abolish the empire. Know your enemy. Get The War State by Michael Swanson. It's available at your local bookstore or at Amazon.com in Kindle or in paperback. Just click the book in the right margin at scotthorton.org or thewarstate.com. Hey, Scott here. If you're like me, you need coffee. Lots of it. And you probably prefer it tastes good, too. Well, let me tell you about Darren's Coffee Company at darrenscoffee.com. Darren Marion is a natural entrepreneur who decided to leave his corporate job and strike out on his own, making great coffee. And Darren's Coffee is now delivering right to your door. Darren gets his beans direct from farmers around the world. All specialty, premium grade with no filler. Hey, the man just wants everyone to have a chance to taste this great coffee. darrenscoffee.com. Use promo code Scott and you get free shipping. darrenscoffee.com.